Octavia Estelle Butler was born June 22nd, 1947 in Pasadena, California. She grew up in a household with just her mother, for her father passed away, and Butler ended up becoming a writer and started her writing career in the 70s. She will often write books on African American spiritualism and science fiction.
Kindred, which was published in 1979, was written because Butler had noticed the horrors of slavery were being minimized by those who have never experienced enslavement. Throughout the book, she uses internal events and adds suspense to them. Butler does this to capture the reader's attention so that they can implement themselves into the novel and feel the fear and emotions that the characters were experiencing. Butler wanted the minimized hardships of being Black during the antebellum years to be felt especially by African American audience.
The novel starts off with Dana, the main character, mysteriously losing an arm, and Dana's mind was racing with thoughts and emotions, and she was trying to figure out how to explain what happened to her without actually saying what happened. She was explaining this to the cops the best way that she could so that her nor her husband, Kevin, got into trouble. She didn't want them to put her in a crazy house, and she didn't want them to put him in jail for abuse. So right off the bat, you kind of see that Butler grabs the reader's attention by sharing this extremely tragic event early off in the novel. Actually, it was the first sentence where she explained that her arm was detached from her body. This early action has the reader hop directly into the suspenseful yet exciting part of the novel. Butler then shifts the narratives to days prior to Dana losing her arm. This builds up suspense and curiosity because it leaves the audience to wonder how the previous events will come into effect later on in the story.
Later on, we are introduced to Rufus, a troublesome kid whose father was a slave master on the plantation. Tom Whalen, the slave master, allowed Kevin and Dana to stay with him as long as they worked. Being a Black woman, Dana was put to work with all the other slaves. She got caught reading by Tom Whalen and was punished for it. She was whipped very harshly until she disappeared back into the present. This situation leaves the reader to empathize with Dana's pain and emotions. At this moment, there are connections being made with the reader and the characters, which prompts the reader to be excited for her next steps. She would eventually have to go back in time to the same place where she was beaten. And the fact that she disappeared into thin air during the night her beaten makes you wonder how the master will react to her sudden disappearance when she returned. This is an example of impending tension, which in this case is used to create suspense.
It is discovered that Dana is related to Rufus and tries to save him over and over again. Dana returns back to the past to save Rufus and to try to raise him to become a better person than who his father was. His father, the slave master. Unfortunately, that didn't work out, and Rufus ended up becoming just like his father anyways. So later on in the story, Rufus claims that he's fallen in love with Alice, who happens to be Dana's really great grandmother. And Rufus actually ends up blackmailing Dana into helping him rape her really great grandmother. Unfortunately, Dana sort of complies with him because Rufus happens to be the only person who knows anything about where Kevin is, because at this time in the novel, Kevin is missing. So the dilemma it puts the reader inside of Dana's thoughts so that they can see how Dana's choices will sort of play out in the future. Butler chooses to put Dana in multiple dilemmas throughout the story to kind of create suspense and to display the hardships of slavery. In my opinion, Butler succeeded in her goal and was able to effectively use imagery, dilemmas, shifts, tension, etc. to evoke excitement and create suspense, ultimately allowing the reader to empathize with the struggles that our ancestors faced during slavery.